Tonight, before you drift off, I want to tell you something outrageous, something scandalous, something furry. There was a time when cats weren't in your living room, not on your keyboard, not knocking mugs off your shelves at 3:17 in the morning. They weren't stretching luxuriously on sun-drenched windowsills or purring judgmentally beside you as you try to fold laundry. In fact, there was a time, and this is difficult to imagine, when cats didn't care about us at all. And worse, we didn't care about them either. Imagine it. A world where there were no cat memes, no cat cafes, and no guilty green eyes peeking out from behind the curtain after someone has shredded the new couch. Just silence, dust, stone, and wild eyes in the dark. But somewhere, no one knows the exact moment, the balance shifted. Maybe it was in a tiny Neolithic hut, lit by fire and filled with grain, where a hungry wild feline crept in after mice. Maybe it was on a boat, drifting between continents, carrying not only olives and ceramics, but a stowaway with paws and very sharp opinions. Or maybe, just maybe, it was in the gentle grave of a man on the island of Cyprus 9,500 years ago, where archaeologists would one day find the curled bones of a cat buried with him, side by side. They weren't pets, not yet, but something was changing. A whisper between species, a treaty signed with a flick of a tail, and a shared understanding. You keep the mice away, and we'll tolerate each other, for now. Tonight's story is not about kings or battles, not about revolutions or empires. It's about the quietest conquest in history, the one you didn't notice, the one curled up beside you. This is the story of how cats domesticated themselves and, perhaps, domesticated us. So lay back, let your thoughts slow, let your breath match the quiet rhythm of a purring chest, and follow me into the tall grasses of Africa, the sandy ruins of Cyprus, the streets of Rome, the libraries of Cairo, and the alleys of every modern city, where paws have passed in silence for millennia. And somewhere in the shadows, they are still watching. Whispers in the grass, the African wildcat's quiet gaze. It begins not with a purr, but with a rustle. You are not in a house, or a village, or even a world with metal tools. You are somewhere else, far older. A warm dusk hangs over a dry savanna. The long grasses breathe in the wind like sleeping lungs. The sun is low, the air still, and the first stars begin to twitch open like glowing eyes in the sky. And somewhere in this ancient hush, a shape moves. It is lean, low, the color of dust. It slides between shrubs, its paws barely touching the earth, its breath steady and measured. This is not a predator of violence, not a lion that roars, not a cheetah that chases. This is something different, a ghost in fur. Felis sylvestris libica, the African wildcat. Solitary, nocturnal, almost invisible. It watches more than it moves. It listens more than acts. And unlike wolves who travel in packs, or cows who herd, this animal makes no sound unless it must. It prefers distance, dignity, and shadows. It has no loyalty to others of its kind. Its bond is with silence. And yet, this creature is the great-grandparent of your fat, yawning tabby cat, of the one snoring beside you, of the one on your aunt's windowsill, of the one licking its foot in front of the Parliament building. The wildcat hunts alone, mostly rodents, birds, insects, anything small and crunchy, and it does this perfectly well without humans. For hundreds of thousands of years, it had no reason to come near us. But the world was changing. Around 12,000 years ago, some very odd primates started doing something strange. They stopped roaming. They began planting things. And worse, they started storing things. And those things attracted mice. And those mice attracted eyes. Felis sylvestris libica did not have to change. It merely had to show up. It already had everything it needed: small size, stealth, adaptability. But now there was opportunity. A buffet of pests, a chance to hunt without running, and, as strange as it seemed, a chance to get close to something new, something noisy, upright, smelly, and hairless. A human. And so the whispering began, a silent negotiation between the wildcat and the newly settled humans. The cat kept its distance. The human threw a leftover bone. The cat stayed longer. The human noticed fewer mice. The cat curled near the fire, just out of reach. The human didn't shoo it away. No ropes, no cages, no whistles or wagging tails. Just quiet tolerance. And for Felis sylvestris libica, that was enough. Some stayed wild. Others wandered further into the huts. A few were even born in human spaces. And slowly, over generations, these cats began to live not just near us, but among us. They didn't become different. We did. And in the dry grasses of ancient Africa, a story began. Not a loud one, not a story of conquest or of revolution, but a soft one, a patient one, a story with pause. Mice, Millet, and Mutiny, the first human encounters. Let's stay in the past just a little longer. It's morning now. A soft, dust-colored light pours across the hills of what will one day be called the Fertile Crescent, though no one calls it anything yet. Here, early humans, not quite farmers, not quite foragers, are trying something revolutionary. They're staying put. Not forever, just long enough to plant a few things, mostly barley and millet. Millet is nothing special. It grows easily, stores well, isn't terribly fussy about soil. But for these early humans, it's not just a food source. It's a gamble. If it works, they can build granaries. If they build granaries, they can settle. If they settle, they can stay warm, raise families, and maybe, just maybe, relax. But millet has an enemy. Tiny, relentless, whiskered enemies. Mice. Mice adore mice. They nest in the walls, chew through baskets, scatter droppings across storage pits. And suddenly, humanity's best-laid plans are full of holes. But then, one night, a pair of eyes watches a mouse. And those eyes don't blink. Felis sylvestris libica has entered the village, not as a pet, not as a helper, simply as a hunter. It doesn't need a collar. It doesn't need training. It needs mice. And the millet has made mice very easy to find. At first, the humans are wary. This animal isn't like their dogs, with wagging tails and obvious loyalty. It's quiet. It stares. It never begs. It takes what it wants and leaves. But it also kills the mice. And little by little, the dynamic shifts. A bone tossed near the hearth. A corner of the hut where no one minds if the cat curls up. The occasional child who tries to pet it and quickly learns why that's a bad idea. Still, the relationship holds, barely, cautiously. We call this a commensal relationship, a term from biology that means one organism benefits, the other isn't harmed. The cats ate. The humans didn't mind. For a long time, that was enough. But commensalism has a way of evolving, especially when both sides start to see the benefit. Over time, some cats became bolder, more curious, less likely to run. And some humans, whether out of gratitude or just boredom, began to encourage their presence. They left scraps. They didn't chase them off. Maybe, just maybe, they admired them. There is something mesmerizing a cat in motion. The way it crouches, pauses, springs. It's not just useful, it's beautiful. And somewhere among the millet and the mice, a human gave a cat a name. We'll never know what that name was. It didn't get carved in stone. It didn't survive in any language. But someone said it, softly, repeatedly, until the cat turned its head when it heard it. That was the moment. Not when the first cat entered a home, not when the first human left a fish head by the fire, but when the cat had a name. From that moment on, there was no going back. This wasn't just commensalism anymore. This was the beginning of friendship.
The Island Pact. Burial in Cyprus. The sea is not kind to cats. You know this if you've ever tried to give one a bath or convince one to step willingly into a puddle. Cats are, by and large, not fans of water. It's one of their most reliable personality traits. So, how did a creature so famously averse to moisture find its way onto an island? Let's drift slowly to the year 2001. A team of French archaeologists is digging in the soil of southern Cyprus. The sun is gentle, the wind smells of salt, and under layers of rock and sediment, something strange emerges. A grave. Graves aren't unusual. The Neolithic world buried its dead with care. What is unusual is what's beside the bones of this particular human. A flint tool, some seashells, and something curled up at his side. A cat. Not the bones of a wild predator, not a meal, but an 8-month-old feline, deliberately buried beside its human. This changes everything. Until now, Egypt had held the crown for the oldest evidence of cat domestication. Sleek murals and statues from around 4,000 years ago. But this Cypriot grave is more than 9,000 years old. It's not flashy, It's not royal, but it is intimate. You can imagine it, can't you? A human who, after death, was laid to rest with something soft, something alive once that they had shared days with. Maybe the cat followed them from room to room. Maybe it stole food. Maybe it made them laugh. And when it died, or when the human did, someone decided they should be together. That is not utility. That is connection. And the implications are staggering. Cyprus is an island, separated from mainland Turkey by over 70 kilometers of sea. Cats didn't swim there. They didn't build rafts. Someone brought them. Which means this: as early as 10,000 years ago, humans were not just tolerating cats, they were carrying them across oceans. This is the Island Pact. Silent, unrecorded, but clear. You don't bring an animal on a voyage unless you value it. You don't let it live aboard unless it has a place. And you certainly don't bury it with honor unless something deeper is at work. By this time, the relationship had shifted. Cats weren't just tolerated hunters. They were companions. They still weren't pets, not in the modern sense. They weren't trained, they didn't obey, but they had carved out a place in human settlements and hearts, with nothing more than their presence. No barking, no herding, no tricks. Just a quiet gaze, a warm body near the fire, and an understanding. We are useful to each other. It's tempting to imagine that cat purring beside the man in the grave. But purring, too, is a mystery. We still don't know exactly how it works, or why they do it. To comfort themselves? To bond with us? Both? Perhaps, long before the grave was dug, that cat curled beside the man's legs at night, its motor running, soft and steady, syncing with the rhythm of human breath. Two species, two hearts, one fire. And when the fire went out, they stayed together. Commensal companions, when evolution walks sideways. Let's pause for a moment to consider how strange cats are. Not in a bad way, in a wonderfully improbable way. Most domesticated animals didn't just happen. They were chosen, tamed, bred, and sculpted into their roles by human hands. Dogs were shaped from wolves to guard, herd, hunt, and love. Cows, sheep, pigs, they were all carefully steered through generations of selective breeding to give us milk, meat, wool, and labor. But cats? Cats walked in, made themselves useful, and stayed. That's it. There was no campaign to capture and tame them, no planned breeding program for centuries. They just sort of showed up. And over thousands of years, they went from wild ghosts in the grass to curled up companions in our beds. How? The answer lies in a process called commensal domestication, a rare, gentle side road in the evolutionary highway. Unlike the prey pathway, where animals like goats or cattle were first hunted and later herded, or the directed pathway, where we purposely domesticated species for transport or work, like horses, the commensal pathway begins with a simple fact. We made a mess. They cleaned it up. When humans started farming, we inadvertently created ecosystems full of waste, rodents, and leftover food. This mess attracted opportunistic species, scavengers who could live on our margins.
Some of these species, like rats and cockroaches, remained pests. But a few, like cats, saw a bigger opportunity. The wildcat Felis sylvestris libica had the perfect toolkit. Stealthy, silent, nocturnal, rodent-killing machines. And slowly, as they hovered around our settlements, something began to shift in both species. The bolder cats got closer. The more tolerant humans let them. Generation after generation, the friendliest cats lived longer near people and reproduced. Not because we forced them to, but because it worked. Evolution didn't gallop, it strolled. Over centuries, cats began to differ ever so slightly from their wild cousins. Smaller skulls, slight changes in temperament, more varied coat colors. But these changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, especially compared to the dramatic transformations we see in dogs. And that's part of the magic. Cats weren't bred to be docile. They never lost their independence. They still hunt. They still hide. They still decide when they want affection and when they don't. But they stayed. They chose to live alongside us, not as livestock, not as tools, but as roommates. And remarkably, we changed for them too. We rearranged our homes around their needs. We left doors ajar. We tolerated scratched furniture. We created litter boxes, toys, cat trees, and eventually entire empires of cat videos. This isn't one species shaping another. This is a mutual drift. A sidewalk through time. A quiet evolution of dominance or control, but of parallel lives loosely stitched together by warmth, convenience, and the shared hatred of rodents. And in that slow dance, cats didn't become our animals. We became their humans.
Of tabby stripes and silent steps. The coat of a cat tells a quiet story. Not just about fashion or genetics or preference, but about deep evolutionary choices. About the invisible hands of time, environment, and chance brushing gently across fur. Before cats became beloved household creatures, they wore a single practical outfit, the mackerel tabby. A pattern of stripes, thin and vertical, running like rain down their sides. It is the camouflage of the wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica, optimized for tall grasses, dappled light, and stalking small prey with precision. Even today, many domestic cats still wear this coat. You've seen it, tigerish, symmetrical, efficient. You can trace the stripes with your finger, like ancient lines carved in stone. Some say it's the fingerprint of their lineage, a memory in pigment. But as cats and humans drew closer, something began to shift in their coats. You might expect these changes to come quickly, like with dogs, but cats change slowly. Most of the coat color variation we see today, it's relatively new. For thousands of years, cats still looked more or less the same. Brownish, striped, practical. Then, sometime around 1,000 years ago, a mutation. A genetic hiccup introduced the blotched tabby, a swirlier, more chaotic version of the neat mackerel pattern. Instead of straight lines, these cats wore marbled loops, rounded shapes, and lazy spirals. It wasn't better, it wasn't worse, but it was different. And humans, ever suckers for novelty, noticed.
As cats spread into colder climates, their coats thickened. New color variations emerged: oranges, creams, pure blacks and whites. These weren't adaptations for survival. They were just interesting. And we liked interesting. So we began, perhaps unknowingly at first, to favor the unusual. A cat with a pale orange coat might have gotten more attention. A black kitten may have been spared because of a child's affection. A long-haired anomaly might have been kept near the hearth. Bit by bit, selection took hold. Not artificial, like with show dogs, but subtle, unconscious reinforcement. And the cats changed. Today, there are over 70 recognized cat breeds, from hairless sphinxes to luxuriously thick Maine Coons. But even more telling is the sheer diversity of unpedigreed cats, house cats, street cats, alley cats, wearing every imaginable coat. Spotted, striped, tortoiseshell, calico, eyes like lanterns, fur like clouds, body small, long, round, sharp. But one thing has stayed remarkably consistent: the walk. That slow, soundless glide. The head held level. The tail an expressive semaphore. The way a cat enters a room like it was born there, as if gravity works differently for them. You've seen it. You've envied it. And it's always been there. No matter the coat, no matter the name. Whether stalking mice in Neolithic barns or demanding treats in a 12th floor apartment, a cat walks like a secret. And you always follow.
Egypt's soft paw print. Let us walk quietly, reverently, into ancient Egypt. A land of sun-baked stone, silver rivers, and gods who wore the heads of animals. Here, more than anywhere else, cats stepped out of the shadows of utility and into the glow of reverence. By 3,500 years ago, cats were no longer just tolerated, they were adored. Hieroglyphs show them curled beneath chairs, feasting beside nobles, adorned with earrings. Tomb paintings depict them on boats, on laps, on pedestals. And in one particularly famous scene, a cat sits under a woman's chair at a banquet, not hunting, not lurking, simply being, as if no party is complete without its feline guest. The Egyptians didn't just keep cats, they named them, fed them delicacies, protected them by law. To harm a cat, even accidentally, was considered a crime. Why such devotion? It wasn't just because cats were good at catching mice. It was something deeper, something almost spiritual. Cats, with their slitted eyes and silent movements, seemed to dwell in both worlds, the seen and the unseen. They were elegant but wild, affectionate but aloof. They appeared when they wished, disappeared when they chose. In a culture obsessed with death, rebirth, and balance, cats were walking metaphors. And so they became sacred. Bastet, goddess of home, fertility, and women, took the form of a lioness, then a domestic cat. Her temples were filled with offerings, prayers, and eventually, cat mummies, thousands upon thousands of them. Not all of these were pets. Some were bred specifically for ritual burial, a practice that troubles modern sensibilities, but illustrates the depth of feline reverence. There are stories, possibly exaggerated,
of Roman ambassadors enraging crowds by killing cats, only to face riots, of houses mourning a feline's death with formal ceremonies, of pharaohs whose tombs were guarded not by dogs, but by painted, purring shadows. Even in death, cats mattered. They were embalmed with care, swaddled in linen, buried with amulets, their faces painted lovingly on tiny sarcophagi. And as these silent creatures moved through the temples of Thebes, across the sands of Saqqara, through the reed-lined banks of the Nile, they became more than Mausers. They became symbols of grace, of mystery, of protection, and of something else, something humans rarely grant another species: respect. True, profound, religious respect. The cats didn't ask for it. They didn't change who they were. But by being themselves, quiet, poised, impossible to command, they became divine. And for a brief moment in history, humans bowed their heads, not to a king, not to a conqueror, but to a creature who purred.
The second domestication, Nile version. Most animals are domesticated once. They begin wild, are caught or tamed, and then pass through a long, tangled dance of genetics and behavior until they become something new, something shaped by our hands and our needs. But cats are not most animals. According to genetic studies, cats may have been domesticated not once, but twice, in two separate places by two different groups of people in two different ways. The first, as we've seen, likely began around 9,500 to 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. African wildcats crept into villages, hunted mice, and slowly, stealthily became part of human life. But the second? The second happened thousands of years later and hundreds of miles away, in Egypt. By around 3,500 years ago, Egypt was not just worshiping cats, but also reshaping them. Archaeological evidence suggests that Egyptian cats had slightly different features than their earlier Levantine cousins. Shorter faces, more social behavior, slight changes in bone structure, a separate lineage or a divergent evolution. This isn't just folklore. This is in the bones. A 2017 study of ancient cat DNA showed that modern domestic cats descend from two major gene pools, one from the Near East and one from ancient Egypt. That's right. Even if your cat was born in Chicago or Nairobi or Osaka, its ancestors likely walked both the barley fields of Mesopotamia and the temple corridors of Thebes. And what's more fascinating is how the Egyptian cat gene spread. Not through farming villages, not through random wandering, but through ships. Egypt was a hub of trade, and its merchants traveled far, to Greece, to Rome, to the Mediterranean islands. And aboard their boats, as always, were cats. At first, for practical reasons, rodent control, shipboard hygiene, but slowly something more. Sailors noticed that cats brought comfort. They calmed the crew, entertained passengers. They were small, self-sufficient, and oddly regal. And so, cats began their second great migration, this time not across deserts, but across oceans. The Egyptian breed, sleeker, more social, and spiritually revered, mixed with the older Levantine line. And from that union came the modern house cat. Two paths, two domestications,
one purring result. Think about that for a moment. While empires rose and fell, while languages vanished and monuments crumbled, cats quietly duplicated their domestication history. They succeeded where others failed, by doing very little at all. No barking, no fetching, just grace, presence, and a willingness to curl up in the sun. We domesticated them, and then we did it again.
Rome, roads, and rodents. If Egypt crowned cats as gods, then Rome made them citizens. By the time the Roman Republic was expanding, cats had already walked through a dozen cultures. They'd lounged in Mesopotamian granaries, been mummified in Egyptian tombs, and had likely meandered through Greek courtyards, batting olives across marble floors. But in Rome, that roaring engine of civilization, conquest, and plumbing, cats found new footing. Rome was built on order, on roads, baths, bureaucracies, and bread. And wherever grain went, so did vermin. Rats stowed away in carts. Mice snuck into storehouses. The empire might have been organized, but its rodents were anarchists. Enter the cat. At first, they were passengers, silent migrants tucked into merchant ships and grain barges. They arrived in ports like Ostia and Neapolis. Then followed soldiers along roads to Gaul, Britannia, Germania, not by invitation, but by instinct. Where grain moved, rodents followed. Where rodents moved, cats followed. And where cats walked, people noticed. In Roman art, cats begin to appear not just as utility, but as presence. Mosaics depict them mid-pounce. Frescoes show them curled under chairs. And inscriptions, faint, weathered, but legible, name them. Yes, name them. Names like Felix, or Musa, or even humorous ones like Fastidious. Their bones have been found buried beneath villas, tucked beside infants, or wrapped with amulets. Were they pets? Sometimes. Were they tools? Often. But mostly they were companions, unofficial, unsanctioned, but undeniably there. And in typical Roman fashion, cats were never just allowed. They were absorbed. Into homes, into symbols, into identity. Cats became part of Roman religion, superstition, and politics. Some saw them as omens, others simply as mouser in residence. But regardless of belief, they spread. By the time the empire was at its height, cats had walked from North Africa to Hadrian's Wall. They strolled across forums, napped on scrolls, hunted under market stalls. They were never declared sacred. They were never given temples. But in a world of concrete, conquest, and cold stone, cats brought something else. Warmth. The kind that curls up at your feet without asking. The kind that blinks slowly from the corner of the room. The kind that reminds an empire that life isn't all discipline and marble. Sometimes it's fur and silence and the sound of small paws in a corridor. Monastery mice and purring psalms. After Rome fell, the world grew quieter. The great marble forums emptied. The aqueducts cracked. The scrolls were stashed away, sometimes burned, sometimes hidden. And in the silence that followed, Europe entered a long night, a time of slow rebuilding, flickering candles, and whispered prayers. But in this twilight, another structure began to rise, the monastery. Stone by stone, far from cities, monks built worlds within walls, cloisters, gardens, libraries, dormitories, cold chapels that echoed with Latin hymns. And with them, though not always mentioned, came the cats. At first, they were workers, mousers, a practical solution to a persistent problem. Rodents chewing through parchment, gnawing at stored grain, scurrying through storerooms where silence should have reigned. Cats moved through monasteries like ghosts. They slept in libraries, stretched on sun-warmed sills, wandered through cloisters. They watched the scribes by candlelight. They flicked their tails under long wooden tables. They blinked slowly while monks copied Bibles. And every so often, they left their mark. One 15th century manuscript contains a small smudge, a pair of inky paw prints across a page of sacred text. The scribe, in the margins, cursed the cat, not with anger, but with weary familiarity. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Cats didn't chant, they didn't confess, but they belonged. They became part of the rhythm of monastic life, quiet observers of human devotion, unbothered by ritual, immune to theology, but present, always present. And the monks, in turn, grew fond of them. Some texts even contain poems, short verses in praise of a beloved mouser. One Irish monk wrote of his cat, Pangorban. I and Pangorban my cat, 'tis a like task we are at. He compares his writing to the cat's hunting, both in silent pursuit of truth and motion. It's a metaphor, a prayer, a purr wrapped in verse. Cats in these sacred halls weren't just tolerated, they were understood. They mirrored the monastic life, silent, contemplative, patient. They asked nothing, expected nothing, but gave, somehow, exactly what was needed. Warmth on a cold stone floor, a partner in stillness, a lesson in solitude. And as the monks copied words meant to save souls, the cats curled beside them, eyes half closed, keeping the mice and perhaps the darkness at bay.
Imagine the sea, endless, restless, with sails flapping and ropes creaking. Now imagine a small wooden vessel cutting through the waves, heavy with spices, grain, or glass. Below deck, in the belly of that ship, there are shadows, and in those shadows, tiny paws. Cats aboard ships. It might seem strange at first. Why would sailors bring cats into such a harsh, shifting world of water and wind? But to a seafaring mind, a cat is not just a creature. It's a necessity. Ships, particularly those carrying grain or food, were perfect havens for rodents. Mice chewed through sacks, gnawed ropes, and brought disease. One good rat infestation could spell doom for a voyage. Cats, however, solved this problem elegantly and with style. They prowled the decks, slept in coils of rope, watched gulls from the prow, and with each paw step, they earned their place. Historical records mention ship cats as early as ancient Egypt, But their true rise came in the age of sail, when maritime empires expanded and ships became floating cities. These cats became sailors in their own right. They were given names, nicknames, sometimes even hammocks. Some wore little collars. Others were beloved mascots. There are stories of sailors tattooing cats on their arms, claiming it brought luck in storms. In the British Royal Navy, cats were standard, so much so that many famous vessels had resident felines. HMS Prince of Wales, HMS Hood, and even the legendary HMS Victory. And while they worked, oh, how they worked, they also soothed. Sea life was hard. Wet boots, bad food, sickness, long months away from home. But a warm, purring cat asleep near your bunk? That was comfort. That was home in a foreign sea. Cats adapted. They learned to balance with the sway of the ship. Some would even find hiding places during cannon fire or storms. And, of course, they hunted. Some ship cats became famous, like Simon, the cat of HMS Amethyst, who during the Yangtze incident in 1949 continued catching rats and raising morale, even after being wounded. He was awarded the Dickin Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross. Then there was Unsinkable Sam, a cat who survived the sinking of 3 ships during World War II, including the Bismarck. Each time he was rescued, adopted by a new crew, and continued his sea-bound career. These cats weren't passengers, they were crew. They crossed oceans, climbed rigging, slept in sailors' coats, and when they died, some were buried at sea with honors. They didn't understand flags or borders or orders from captains, but they understood hunger and warmth and the odd beauty of stars over black water. And so they traveled. From port to port, continent to continent, they became silent agents of domestication, carriers of lineage, soft-footed emissaries of home. And long before passports or paperwork, cats had already circled the globe. All they needed was a rat, a rope coil, and a place to nap.
Coats, colors, and curiosity. A 19th century explosion. For most of history, cats came in one basic model: efficient. They were lean, quiet, short-haired, and dressed in practical colors: browns, grays, and stripes meant for blending in. Evolution, after all, had favored function over flair. A wildcat couldn't afford to stand out. But by the 1800s, something had shifted, not in the cats, but in us. The 19th century was an age of spectacle, of industry, exhibition, and novelty. Steam-powered cities, museums filled with bones and beetles, zoos and world fairs displayed animals not just for study, but for amazement. And someone, somewhere, looked at a cat and thought, what if it had longer fur? What if it was snow white? What if it had no hair at all? This was the beginning of selective breeding, not for usefulness, but for beauty. Until then, cats had largely chosen us, but now we began choosing them. The first modern cat show took place in London's Crystal Palace in 1871. There, under vaulted glass ceilings, cats were judged not by their mousing ability,
but by the luster of their coat, the curve of their ears, the elegance of their tail. Persians with luxurious manes, Siamese with startling blue eyes, Manx cats with no tails. Suddenly, the cat was not just a creature, it was a category. New breeds emerged, defined and documented. Breeders began shaping cats with care, pairing specific traits to produce predictable results. It was part science, part fashion, and part ego. Some breeds were ancient, rediscovered. Others were entirely new, mutations lovingly refined. The British Shorthair, the Russian Blue, the Burmese. The exotic and the domestic collided, curled up together, and purred. But while the breed explosion bloomed, the ordinary house cat, the non-pedigreed, half-feral, alley-roaming mouser, remained the global majority. And even these cats changed. Urbanization meant more cats indoors. Heating and insulation meant longer fur was more survivable. Access to food softened features. People began tolerating, even encouraging, cats that lounged rather than labored. Aesthetic suddenly mattered. Black cats, once feared as omens, became beloved. Calicos and torties, with their chaotic splashes of color, became prized. Blue-gray cats, once rare, became the height of elegance. And all along, curiosity thrived. Not just in the cats, in us. We started asking new questions. What makes a cat purr? Why do some knead with their paws? How do they always land on their feet? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why do we love them so much? There's no single answer, but the 19th century cracked the door open. It invited us to see cats not only as survivors and companions, but as works of art, living sculptures, quiet enigmas draped in silk and attitude. And the cats, as always, adapted. They didn't mind being admired, so long as the admiration came with food, sunbeams, and respect. And so the modern cat, in all its striped, spotted, hairless, fluffy, blue-eyed, purring glory, was born. Not from the wilderness, but from a gallery of wonder. Coats, colors, and curiosity. A 19th century explosion. For most of history, cats came in one basic model: efficient. They were lean, quiet, short-haired, and dressed in practical colors: browns, grays, and stripes meant for blending in. Evolution, after all, had favored function over flair. A wildcat couldn't afford to stand out. But by the 1800s, something had shifted, not in the cats, but in us. The 19th century was an age of spectacle, of industry, exhibition, and novelty. Steam-powered cities, museums filled with bones and beetles, zoos and world fairs displayed animals not just for study, but for amazement. And someone, somewhere, looked at a cat and thought, what if it had longer fur? What if it was snow white? What if it had no hair at all? This was the beginning of selective breeding, not for usefulness, but for beauty. Until then, cats had largely chosen us. But now we began choosing them. The first modern cat show took place in London's Crystal Palace in 1871. There, under vaulted glass ceilings, cats were judged not by their mousing ability, but by the luster of their coat, the curve of their ears, the elegance of their tail. Persians with luxurious manes, Siamese with startling blue eyes, Manx cats with no tails. Suddenly, the cat was not just a creature, it was a category. New breeds emerged, defined and documented. Breeders began shaping cats with care, pairing specific traits to produce predictable results. It was part science, part fashion, and part ego. Some breeds were ancient, rediscovered. Others were entirely new, mutations lovingly refined. The British Shorthair, the Russian Blue, the Burmese. The exotic and the domestic collided, curled up together, and purred. But while the breed explosion bloomed, the ordinary house cat, the non-pedigreed, half-feral, alley-roaming mouser, remained the global majority. And even these cats changed. Urbanization meant more cats indoors. Heating and insulation meant longer fur was more survivable. Access to food softened features. People began tolerating, even encouraging, cats that lounged rather than labored. Aesthetic suddenly mattered. Black cats, once feared as omens, became beloved. Calicos and torties, with their chaotic splashes of color, became prized. Blue-gray cats, once rare, became the height of elegance. And all along, curiosity thrived. Not just in the cats, in us. We started asking new questions. What makes a cat purr? Why do some knead with their paws? How do they always land on their feet? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why do we love them so much? There's no single answer, but the 19th century cracked the door open. It invited us to see cats not only as survivors and companions, but as works of art, living sculptures, quiet enigmas draped in silk and attitude. And the cats, as always, adapted. They didn't mind being admired, so long as the admiration came with food, sunbeams, and respect. And so the modern cat, in all its striped, spotted, hairless, fluffy, blue-eyed, purring glory, was born. Not from the wilderness, but from a gallery of wonder.
Plagues, superstitions, and feline scapegoats. There is a shadow in every story, and in the long companionship between cats and humans, it came, dark, irrational, and sharp as a torch-lit pitchfork. The Middle Ages were not kind to ambiguity. In a world filled with uncertainty, plague, famine, and fear, people clung to symbols, to saints and sinners, to signs and curses, to anything that might explain the unexplainable. And in this haze of fear, cats became suspect. Why? Because they watched, because they didn't obey, because their eyes glowed in the night, and they moved without sound, and they didn't flinch at death,
By the 13th century, European superstition had begun its slow turn against cats. Black cats especially became entangled in myths of witchcraft and devilry. In religious texts, they were depicted as familiars, demonic servants of witches. In folk tales, they slinked through graveyards, whispered secrets to the damned, crossed thresholds as omens of doom. And the consequences were real. Cats were killed, sometimes in public displays, sometimes during festivals, sometimes alongside women accused of witchcraft. In some regions, laws were passed against keeping cats. In others, they were hunted as vermin themselves. And then, the plague. In the mid-14th century, the Black Death swept across Europe, killing an estimated third of the population. It was sudden, brutal, and incomprehensible. People searched desperately for causes, for someone or something to blame. And in their grief and ignorance, they turned again to the cats. But here's the cruel twist of history. Cats could have helped. The plague was spread in part by fleas carried by rats. And who, throughout history, had kept rat populations in check? Exactly. But the very animals that could have mitigated the spread were already gone. Burned, banished, feared. In trying to purge evil, people had removed one of their best defenses. It is one of history's quietest ironies, that the scapegoat was the solution, that fear, once again, was louder than observation. Over time, the panic faded, the superstitions loosened, and cats, resilient as ever, crept back into barns, alleys, and kitchens. They didn't forgive. They didn't need to. They simply resumed their place, as they always had. But the scars remained, in stories, in symbols, in that lingering unease some people still feel when a black cat crosses their path. It's not the cat's fault. It never was. But fear, like fleas, can spread in silence. And sometimes the quietest creatures bear the loudest blame.
From barns to bedrooms. There was a time, not long ago, when cats slept in barns. They lived among the hay bales and rafters, chased mice through grain bins, and emerged at dusk like little shadows. Farmers didn't name them. Children might toss them scraps, but they were not pets. They were workers. Quiet, efficient, feral. But something changed. The Industrial Revolution pulled people into cities. Apartments replaced farmhouses. Grocery stores replaced cellars. Horses gave way to cars, and grain stores shrank into paper bags. The barn, as a center of life, faded, and the cat, ever adaptable, moved indoors. Not all at once, not everywhere, but slowly, cats came in from the cold. At first, it was practical. Rodents still existed. Tenement buildings and narrow alleys still needed a mouser or two. But as the decades passed, the mouse problem dwindled, and the cats remained. Because by then, they weren't just mousers. They were companions. In post-war homes filled with linoleum and radio music, cats began sleeping at the foot of beds. In suburban kitchens with Formica counters, they licked gravy from clean white bowls. On shag carpets and hardwood floors, they curled into question marks and dreamed.
and their status shifted. They got names. They got collars. They got veterinary care. They weren't just animals. They were family. The 20th century saw the rise of the indoor cat, and with it, a profound shift in the cat-human relationship. Cats no longer needed to earn their place. They no longer had to prove their worth through the carcass of a mouse. Their presence, soft, still, comforting, became the value. People began speaking to their cats, leaving the radio on for them during the day, designing furniture around their sleeping habits, inventing toys, treats, even birthday parties. And the cats, true to form, accepted this with royal indifference. They hadn't changed much, not really. They still watched more than they spoke, still disappeared for hours without explanation, still insisted on affection at inconvenient times. But they were there, not just in barns or alleys, but in living rooms, on pillows, in laps. They had passed, quietly and without fanfare, from utility to intimacy. And perhaps this is their greatest adaptation. Not claws, not camouflage, not purring, but their ability to remain themselves, while allowing us to wrap them in layers of meaning, affection, and ritual. We brought them indoors, and in doing so, brought something ancient and wild into the softest parts of our lives. From barns to bedrooms, from mouser to muse. The journey was not loud, but it was complete.
World domination, softly whispered and warmly curled. Look around. There is a cat on your phone case, a cat in your feed, a cat perched on the windowsill of a bakery in a town you've never heard of, halfway around the world. There are cats in bookstores, curled beside registers, cats in temples, still worshipped, cats on billion-view videos, loafed, blinking, unimpressed. Somehow, without armies, banners, or laws, cats have taken over. They have achieved what emperors dreamed of: global reach, cultural relevance, multi-platform influence, and unwavering loyalty from their subjects. They did it by being quiet, by being small, by being unapologetically themselves. Estimates today place the global cat population at over 600 million. They live on every continent humans inhabit. They cross cultures and classes, religions and languages. They live in penthouses and alleyways. They curl in cardboard boxes and satin-lined beds. They are, quite simply, everywhere. And while dogs may still win in raw numbers, they play a different game. Dogs serve. Cats settle. They don't guard your house. They become your house. They choose which lap to sit on. They choose when the day starts. And somehow, we let them. Not because we are weak, but because we are enchanted. By the sound of a purr, by the warm loaf shape on the radiator, by the tiny murder face turned toward a red laser dot. It's a strange kind of power, the kind that doesn't conquer, but invites. Not coercion, but allure. And in that allure, cats have become something more than pets. They are mood, aesthetic, memory. They are the soft punctuation to a hard day,
the silent witness to your late-night thoughts, the living statue perched above your fridge. In a world of noise, cats are a hush. In a world of speed, they are stillness. In a world of demands, they ask for nothing and receive everything. This is not an empire of walls and flags. This is an empire of couches and windowsills, of whispering tales and half-livid eyes. And it is, perhaps, the most successful empire the world has ever known. All hail the softly curled monarchs. They've ruled us for 10,000 years, and we wouldn't have it any other way.